This is part 2 of chapter 9 Screencast, and I'll be discussing about the War of 1812 and the events that occurred after the War of 1812. So, as we all know, United States was a trading nation, and the chief belligerents in Europe, Britain, and France showed no mutual rights or respect towards United States. Henry Clay proposed an idea of the war to President Madison. And many people were against it because Britain was a strong Britain they had a strong navy, and they thought that it was unnecessary, and they thought that they would lose. But they were wrong. They actually won. Well, they didn't really win, but then they were wrong because in late 1812 the U.S. warship Constitution raised American morale by defeating and sinking a British ship off the coast of Nova Scotia. And one important naval battle of the war was fought in 1813, led by Captain Perry, and he declared proudly, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." Perry's naval victory prepared the way for General William Henry Harrison's military victory at the Battle of Thames River, near Detroit, in which Tecumseh was killed. The following year, 1814, another young captain, Thomas MacDonald, defeated British fleet on Lake Champlain, and as a result, the British were forced to retreat and to abandon their plan to invade New York and New England. So there was so the Treaty of Ghent ended the War of 1812, and American peace commissioners traveled to Ghent, Belgium, to discuss terms of peace with British diplomats. And there was an agreement reached, of course, and the terms were a halt to the fighting, the return of all conquered territory to the pre-war claimants, the recognition of the pre-war boundary between Canada and the United States. So the Treaty of Ghent was ratified by the Senate in 1815, and it said nothing at all about the grievances that led to war. Britain made no concessions concerning impressment, blockades, or other maritime differences. Thus, the war ended in stalemate with no gain for either side. In 1814, there was a special convention held at Hartford, Connecticut, in December 1814, and it was held because Federalists who were opposed to the war and Republican government, they had urged that the Constitution be amended, that as a last resort, secession be voted upon. Delegates from New England states rejected the radical calls for secession, but in order to limit the growing power of the Republicans in the South and West, they adopted a number of proposals. And one of them was they would need 2/3 of the vote in both houses for any future declaration of. So when President Monroe was elected as a president, it was also known as era of good feeling, because President Monroe's years were marked by a spirit of nationalism, optimism, and goodwill. However, that's not really true, because one of the probably misleading and was probably misleading, and it was certainly oversimplified. Throughout the era, there were heated debates over tariffs, the National Bank, internal improvements, and public land sales. So the actual period of good feelings may have lasted only from the election of 1816 to the Panic of 1819. So Henry Clay, a leader in the House of Representatives, proposed a comprehensive method for advancing nations' economic growth, and his plan is called American System, which has 3 parts, and one of them is protected tariff, national bank, and internal improvements. And Clay argued that protective tariff would promote American manufacturing and also raise taxes to build a national transportation system of federally constructed roads and canals, and a national bank will keep the system running smoothly by providing a national currency. And for internal improvements, however, Madison and Monroe objected that the Constitution did not explicitly provide for the spending of federal money on roads and canals. So the tariff of 1816 was after the 1812, and after the War of 1812, Congress raised the tariff rates on certain goods for the express purpose of protecting U.S. manufacturers from ruin. During the wartime, a number of factories were created that previously had been imported from Britain, and after the war, U.S. were afraid that British goods might take away their business, so tariff of 1860 was passed, and it was the first protective tariff in United States history, and it protected the U.S. items from foreign companies. In 1819, there were 11 slave and 11 free states, and it was important to balance this because as long as this balance was preserved, Southern senators could block legislation that are in the interest of their section. If Missouri came in as a slave state, then it would tip the political balance in South's favor. So a representative, James Talmadge from New York, proposed an amendment to the bill for Missouri's admission, and the amendment called for prohibiting the further introduction of slaves into Missouri, and requiring the children of Missouri slaves to be emancipated at the age of 25. If adopted, the Talmadge Amendment would have led to the gradual elimination of slavery in Missouri, but it wasn't passed, and there was a Henry Clay proposed one, and Henry Clay proposed that Missouri was to be admitted as a slaveholding state, and Maine was to be admitted as a free state, and in the rest of Louisiana Territory north of latitude 3630, slavery was prohibited. The Monroe Doctrine. It was issued by President Monroe, and on December 2nd, 1823, President Monroe inserted into his annual message to Congress a declaration of U.S. policy toward Europe and Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine, as it came to be called, asserted as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European. The President Monroe got the idea of Monroe Doctrine because Richard Rush, the U.S. minister in London, suggested the idea of issuing a joint Anglo-American warning to the European powers not to intervene in South America. And it made sense to America, but Adams believed that joint action with Britain would restrict U.S. opportunities for further expansion in the hemisphere, and his reasons were if the United States acted alone, Britain could be counted upon to stand behind the U.S. policy, and no European power would risk going to war in South America, and if it did, the British Navy would surely defeat the aggressor. Changing his mind, the President decided to act as Adams advised and sure to issue a statement to the world that did not have Britain as a co-author. So in conclusion, Monroe Doctrine stated that U.S. would not intervene with Europeans, and the Europeans will intervene with the Americans.